Hey guys, and welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. And I'm your co-host, Ray Russell, along for the ride. And this week we head to the country, the continent of Australia, guys, as Bob going to tell us all about his time doing two tours. First working for Jim Barnett in 1972, then returning in 1973 for Buddy Fuller and Roy Welch. Bob's going to go back in time and share stories of many of the stars that were there during that time period, and I, for one, can't wait for that. But first, just a quick reminder that you guys can listen to the Wrestling Stoop, along with sister shows like the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. Also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. Currently 3 projects going on right now there at Regional Wrestling, including 1981 in Georgia, 1986 in Bill Watts' UWF, and 1985 in the Memphis territory. You can also listen to the Pro Wrestling Academy, as we all get the English-speaking version of the history of Japanese pro wrestling. And you guys can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you guys are listening, why not do us a little solid here and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast streaming app? Apple and some of the other ones offer the availability to leave a rating for the show that you're listening to. And if you guys like what you're listening to here on the Wrestling Stoop or any of the podcasts as part of WrestleCopia, please leave us that 5-star rating. Drop us a sentence or two. Tell us why you like the shows. It really goes a long way in helping the WrestleCopia brand. And in return, we'll leave you some love, a little shout out here right on the podcast. And be sure to follow us on social media, guys. You can follow Bob Roop, friend him over there at Facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. Bob, always good for an anecdote or two, and I'm sure he's certainly looking forward to adding you as his friend. You guys can also follow me, Ray Russell, on social media. You can follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. And hey, while you're at it, why not subscribe to my YouTube channel, guys? YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And last but certainly not least, now would be a tremendous time to become a WrestleCopia patron, guys. Talking about that $5 all access tier. Get you all sorts of gifts for just $5 over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. And just some of those gifts include all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Monday Warfare, and the Regional Wrestling Podcast. You'll also get early access to many of the podcasts here on WrestleCopia, where you can listen days and as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. Plus, remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all. You also get digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive watch-along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And you get all of that for the low, low price of just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime, give it a try for a month. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into funding the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. So if you like what we're doing here on the Stoop, or the work and effort that I put into the WrestleCopia brand in general, or maybe you're just looking for those aforementioned gifts, I'd appreciate your guys' support in helping me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come. And now with all of that done and out of the way, time for another fun-filled week here on the Wrestling Stoop. The man himself, Bob Roop. Bob, great to be talking with you again.
Oh, man, it's good to be back. And
it's great to be back.
I've been doing some research about what we're talking about this week, just looking back and down memory lane, and at some of the research you actually sent me. And I brought back some memories of some really, really interesting, in quite different ways, but interesting stories came out of the woodworks.
I love it. Yeah. If people could only hear some of the stuff we talk about off air, man, what a draw that would be. But unfortunately, some things are best left off air as well. So we'll just leave it there. Maybe someday, who knows? But last week,
I want to get on that one. Yeah.
Gotta be respectful to some degree, I guess. So last week, man, we were touching on the Garvin family, quote unquote family. Of course, Ronnie and Jimmy, but also Terry Garvin. Great story on Jimmy Garvin. I still get a laugh thinking about you with a butcher knife and an orange standing at their bedroom door. It is kind of creepy, Bob. I'm not going to lie. Also, we talked about Buddy Fuller's booking in Australia, or maybe lack thereof, booking ability in Australia anyway. The Alabama territory doesn't necessarily cope well in the Australia territory, if you will. But this week we're back ready for more here. We talked about it last week. You touched on how you got into that 1973 tour for Buddy Fuller. Jim Barnett had just sold the territory to Roy Welch and Buddy. And you also discussed how and why you left Australia later on in April of 1973. And it wasn't too long after that they closed up shop. And if we have time, we'll touch on that at the end of this episode, because it's not really Bob Roop related, but it's still kind of an interesting story. But right now, we promised it last week. And man, I'm so glad I sent you just some of your results. You kind of looked it over, you looked at the names, and all of these stories came flooding back into your mind, and I'm just excited to get into them, because we're gonna touch on two separate tours here today, hopefully, and the names you encountered. The first tour was still Jim Barnett led in Australia, covering the dates of June 9th through August 12th, 1972, and then if time permits, we're also going to get back into that second tour, the one we discussed a little bit last week, the first part of 1973, January 1st through April 14th, when you worked for Roy Welch and Buddy Fuller, also in Australia. And we talked just a couple of names I threw at you before we got going here, and you chuckled, and I can't even see you, Bob, and I felt a smile come over your face. So I'm looking forward to getting into some of these names here this week.
Okay, well, Big Bad John, how about that one?
How about that one? He was on my list. He wasn't first, but you told me about 1 minute worth of information before we went on air, and that sounds like the perfect name to start with. Big Bad John.
When I got to Australia for the first time, I was met at the Sydney airport by an associate, Lonnie something. I can't remember his last name. I don't know if he probably introduced himself, but it was always first name basis. Anyway, an elderly gentleman, probably younger than I am now, but I was in my 20s at the time. So he picked me up, met me at the gate, and walked me out of the airport. If we stopped at customs, I don't recall it. He had my passport, and I don't know if he gave somebody the high sign or what. I don't remember stopping. And he drove me back to Sydney, got me checked in at the, I want to say Texas Tower Hotel the boy stayed in the King's Cross area of Sydney. The first night, I'm looking around the hotel for, wrestlers. I went down to the restaurant and I looked in the bar. I didn't see anybody. So I'm up in my room, and I got a phone call, and this deep voice says, "Yeah, this is Big Bad John. You just got in, right?" And I'd never even heard of the guy. So he had invited himself down to my room. He came down. He brought a chess set with him. We started playing chess. And yeah, I know, just that part of it's weird enough. But one of the things that he started talking about was he said, you don't smoke that crazy tobacco, do you? And I said, well, I don't know. It depends. It depends. I think maybe that's a possibility. Well, it turns out what he wanted to do is he wanted to find out if I had any information about hashish, which is marijuana to the 10th power or whatever, depending on how powerful your hash is. But I mean, and what they were doing over there, they would buy blocks of hash. When they went up and wrestled that area of the world, up in Kuala Lumpur and Singapore and maybe India and in Hong Kong, you could buy hash right on the street and relatively cheap. Your problem was bringing it back in. I mean, I never did it myself. I've never even thought about it because I wasn't going to go through customs with hash on me. They knew that they could get back into Sydney without custom checks. They just look at them and stamp their, they didn't check their luggage or anything, because the guys had been doing it off and on, King Curtis and Mark Lewin, and King was the one that told me about having a block of hash that was like the size of one of the longer wallets, like you fit into a suit jacket lapel pocket, the one that's like 6 inches long and 3 inches wide. He said he would have maybe a quarter-inch thick or block of hash shoved in one of those compartments. He'd have it sealed where you couldn't smell it, but and then he'd have his passport on the other side, and he would walk through with that in his hand if they'd ask for his passport. So anyway, they were pretty open about it, is what I'm saying. Anyway, what it turns out, the rest of the crew, including Jim Barnett, are all gone. They're not in Sydney. They're in New Zealand. They're working in one of the New Zealand towns that night. So Big Bad John was a manager. He didn't need to be in the town because, manager's superfluous. You've got the regular talent, whoever it was. It might have been Brower he was managing, but he stayed behind. So the rest of the crew wasn't going to be getting back till later that next day. I wasn't going to be able to meet him until the show in Sydney. This was a Thursday night. The show in Sydney was going to be on Friday. So John and I were the only guys left on. I hadn't started yet, but we were the only guys left in town. We hit it off. He was, we're the boys. I didn't know anybody, and he was friendly enough, and we just spoke a little bit. What they did was they would he'd take the hash and he'd kind of make powder of it, and he'd put the powder in with tobacco, like cigarette tobacco, into a cigarette, make a cigarette of it that way and roll it up. If they had marijuana, they might have used marijuana as a thing, but they didn't, so he just used the tobacco. I don't remember being buzzed out of my mind or anything. That came later. So there's a movie in town called The French Connection. It's got a big push. I've been reading about it on the plane on the way over in the airline magazine. We decided, John invited me to go to that, and we were going about 2:00 in the afternoon. So he said, what you ought to do? You'd really enjoy this. He said, you ought to eat some of this hash before we go to the movie. He said, we'll both eat some. We'll go to the movie, and you get a slow kind of high. It comes on, but you really enjoy it. It lasts for a little while. By the time the movie's over, it'll be wearing off and all that. So I said, okay. Well, he took these 2 big chunks of hash, and he put one. It looked like he put it in his mouth, but he didn't. He palmed it, and he handed me the other one. And you didn't chew it. You just swallowed it because it was nasty, yucky stuff. So I did. I thought, I didn't mind getting high. Don't get me wrong. It's kind of exciting being over there. To me, it was better than alcohol because it wasn't so hard on your body. But anyway, we go to the movie, and I don't know, an hour or so into the movie, I noticed that I can't feel the seat underneath me anymore. I don't know whether I've levitated or what, but I'm like just numb. And guess what? It didn't wear off. I could function. I could walk and talk, but I wasn't staggering. It's not like being smashed on booze where you lose control of your body. You're staggering around, and I could maintain, but mentally you're staggering around. You're drunk as a skunk or high as a kite, and so I was still that way. In fact, it might have been even stronger by the time we got to the matches. So here I'm meeting Barnett for the first time. I'm meeting Mark Lewin, Ken Curtis, all these guys, Mario Milano, all these guys I've been hearing about them. All the boys that went to Australia and came back to Florida would come back and they would tell stories. And we were talking about Barnett, your imitation, my bye and all that.
Right.
That was, everybody used that. That was Jim, everybody imitated Jim. But they would talk about all the workers of Mark Lewin, King Curtis were outrageous with their behavior, the things they did. They would talk about them. So these guys are like larger than life to me because I've been hearing about them. It's like they're not legendary in a sense, but I've been hearing about them. So to me, they were big stars, and I wasn't even anywhere on the star chart yet. I'm going to meet them for the first time. We go to the show, to the dressing room, and Jim Barnett asked me to come up and stand next to him, and he introduces me, and I managed to, I guess, look, I nodded or whatever. Well, after he finished talking, he started talking to me, and I was so high, I was so stoned. You couldn't see it maybe, but I was so stoned mentally that I didn't know how to get away from it. He was talking to me, and what I reckoned later, I think back on it now, was that Jim liked to talk about everything, himself and his business and all that. And he loved being a raconteur and telling stories. All the other wrestlers had already been through that with him, and for years. They'd heard everything many times over. Well, now he had a new audience, and that was me. So I'm standing there, he's telling these stories, and all I'm doing is going, uh-huh. And he later told somebody that he thought I was the best conversationalist that he'd ever talked to.
Because you didn't speak back.
No.
You gave Jim all the time in the world to talk.
Yeah, exactly. And so...
Oh, Bobby, my boy, we must do this again.
Well, you know what I'm thinking that that's what got me over with him. Because here I am, a college graduate and an Olympian and all that, who I'm hanging on his every word. Finally, Lewin came up to me and said, hey, you're on in about 15 minutes. You think you might want to get dressed?
Get your act together here.
Get your boots and tights on. So that gave me an excuse to get away. But I mean, I was petrified to even speak to him. I mean, hi, how you doing? But I tried to have a conversation. I wasn't sure what I didn't know what to talk about. So, yeah, that first night, I don't remember the match. I have no idea. I'm sure it went okay. I mean, I could still function, but it's just like mentally you're out of it. Yeah, what a start. I couldn't believe it. And it was funny because what was funny was that guys would smoke all the time over there. And Thunderbolt Patterson and I got in the habit of, even during the day, you know, I mean, it wasn't like that paralyzing type high, but just said relax. You know, maybe before eating, enjoy your food better. After, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, one morning, it was like 9 o'clock in the morning. And of course, it wasn't high at 9 o'clock in the morning. Mark Lewin, we were meeting somewhere to get on a plane, a bus or something. Lewin came up to me and looked me in the eye, and his eyebrows raised. He went, aha! He said, oh, you're on something, aren't you? Yeah, you've been doing something, haven't you? What he saw was the first time he'd seen me. I was straight.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You look different. It was just. Yeah. It was backwards. I got it.
He thought I was stoned. So I thought that was funny. But
so yeah. Big Bad John, quite the character, and obviously a little rib there on you. Wanted you to feel good. He's welcoming you to the world of Australia, World Championship Wrestling. Big Bad John, for those who don't know, a lot of people might not recognize that name. That's because a lot of his big stuff that he did was in Australia, more so as a manager, not just a wrestler. He managed the Big Bad John Army versus the People's Army. So it was all the heels versus the baby faces, all the top echelon stars that were over there. So that's why the TV thrived for so many years. Interchangeable top talent over there. And Big Bad John led the heel group.
Right. Well, he wore black. He was a big guy. He was about 6'5". 300 pounds, but long hair, looked like Rasputin, long hair and beard.
I think I heard that he once upon a time, and this could be urban legend, that he belonged to some sort of a biker gang back in the States.
Very possible. He portrayed an image as a thug, really. I mean, he didn't make threats or anything, but he told a story about he always carried a pistol. And he said it's better to have it, even if you're not supposed to have it, it's better to get caught with it illegally than get caught with it when somebody's trying to kill you and not have it. So
right.
That was kind of his philosophy. He's told a story about being with Lewin one time, and they went into a bar. I guess they had they was at their show somewhere, and Lewin said, well, where do you go? Well, you're the bad guy, the pistol packer. Where do you go? Well, where are these bad clubs you go to? And John said, well, I can take you to one. And, but, watch yourself, be cool. This is what John told me in front of Lewin, and Lewin didn't disagree.
Okay.
So he said that they got up to the bar, and the guy behind the bar came up, and John knew the guy and was saying something. And John introduced, this is Mark Lewin. He's one of my partners here. And Lewin tried to pull I don't know if it was a rib or what he was doing. He said, yeah, and I'm packing too. And as soon as he said that, the guy behind the bar pulled out a pistol and aimed it right between Mark's eye from about a foot. His eyes about a foot away. Uh-huh. John pulled out his pistol and aimed it at the guy behind the bar and said, all right, calm down. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not carrying any weapons, but I am. Let's put our guns down, because if you shoot him, I'm going to have to shoot you. He's my boss. So
sounds like a fun bar.
Yeah. So But Lewin probably had to. I mean, I'm sorry, Mark, if you're out there. I don't know if you had to clean. I don't know if you had to clean your pants or not, but I would have. So yeah, that's the kind. You hear those kind of stories. John, I told you off the air that he had a girl with him that he claimed was a girl that actually was a streetwalker who he was her pet. Wow. And he brought her over there, and I don't know, she wasn't working for him over there. She was more like a girlfriend kind of a thing. So John was interested. And as far as that night in the dressing room, he told the rest of the boys what he'd done. So they're all looking at me and laughing. You know, I can see Barnett talking to me, just enjoying the hell out of himself. He doesn't notice that John's sitting facing me about 10 feet away, just big grin on his face, just just laughing his butt off. And the other guys are going by and giving me a thumbs up when Barnett's like looking like, oh yeah.
What an interesting character, top to bottom. I mean, we start off with the rib, but really it was everything. You know, you were telling me off air that I was like, yeah, man, we got to get this in. I mean, you talk about just nonchalantly. Oh yeah, by the way, he was a pimp. Yeah, he had this streetwalker that he brought over to Australia with him. He pulls guns out at the bar, aims it at the bartender. Well, he did perhaps save Mark Lewin's life there. So kudos to Big Bad John for that. But the irony of this entire story that you're telling now, Bob, about Big Bad John wanting to always carry a pistol on him because you never know when you might need it. The irony is, do you want to tell everybody what happens to Big Bad John?
Well, he forgot to take one into the shower with him. He was murdered while taking a shower in Los Angeles.
Right.
Never found out who did it. At the time, he was suing Mike LaBelle, the promoter out there. He was suing him over. He had been injured, I think, in some kind of wrestling escapade, and he was suing him. And while the suit was still in limbo, he was murdered. Never found out who did it.
Wow.
I have thoughts, but I certainly wouldn't voice them.
Right, I understand.
But yeah, John lived close to the edge, and he was a fun guy. I mean, in a weird way. Did I approve of his lifestyle? No, but that wasn't my choice. Again, it was like with Chris Colt. People are different. And if you want to find out that way of life without having to live it yourself, what better way than to have a bond with somebody through one venue? Say you're both Masons, like in a club, or
sure.
You're both, members of some kind of service club, or you're ex-Marines, or you're paratroopers, or whatever. And then one guy's a doctor, the other guy's a racketeer. But you can get together and you can share those lives because you have that bond of the whatever connects you. So we always had the wrestling that was the basis for us being together. So that predominated. Everything else.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you're totally fine there. No, I was just thinking, you were talking about Big Bad John here, but I was thinking that story you were telling in regards to the bar and how he said, this here's my boss. You're talking about Mark Lewin. And for those who don't know, Mark Lewin was the booker for more often than not during that Australia run out there for Jim Barnett. And I was just curious how Mark Lewin was as a boss, how he was as a booker in your eyes. And I guess if you have any Mark Lewin stories.
Well, the one I talked about him coming up to me and looking at me.
Right, yeah, I remember that one before, right.
You're straight.
And I remember you telling me how when he was living with Kevin Sullivan in Florida, that was a place you couldn't stay. There was just too much going on there for you to handle.
Oh, yeah.
So you got the hell out of there.
The purple haze.
The purple haze.
I've been reflecting on, while I'm doing this research, looking at some of the names we discussed we're going to want to talk about today. I realized that the guys that you sent me, the guys that I have some relationship and close to, are guys that are not the main event guys. Mm-hmm. And the guys that I don't know very well or didn't get to know very well, like Tiger Jeet Singh, for example, were guys that were veterans already. And I looked at everything in life kind of as a seniority. For example, if you're in college and you're a first-term freshman and you're rooming with the guy who's a midterm senior, there's a vast difference. You have the same living accommodations or whatever. You probably wouldn't be together, but you might, for one reason or another. But you owe that person a certain amount of deference based on their experience. That's just my opinion. Now, not a lot of people don't feel that way. It would be the same thing if you were in the service and you made sergeant, and you, after 3 years, say you were like an E5 sergeant. There's another E5 sergeant who's been in the service 20 years. Maybe he even got busted down, but one thing it might be that in the peacetime military, getting promoted is very difficult. It's very easy when there's a war on because all the guys ahead of you and to get promoted, a lot of them get killed. So you get moved up just automatically. But it's hard in peacetime. But the guy who's an E5 just like you are, who's been in the service 20 years, and you've been in the service for 3 or 4 years, to me, I would show that guy deference. Even though we're the same rank, he's got 17 years of experience on me.
Right.
He might have been in the service all over the world. And, I've only been 1 or 2 or 3 places, whatever. So that was just my attitude. And it made sense to me because if you're talking about the same discipline, and you want to pretend that you're some guy, I'm trying to talk to any one of those, Ken Curtis, Mark Lewin, any of those guys about the business, what have I got to say? I got no experience.
Right.
Those guys have forgotten more than I might ever even learn.
Would it be correct to say that some guys are easier to approach? Not that Lewin was like, get away from me, kid, but people just were more outgoing, or you gravitated to people because you talk about how you had plenty of great conversations with the likes of Harley Race, who had been in the business quite a while, and people like that. So it seems like some guys are more easier to get to know than others.
Well, Harley, I think, took to me because of my background. He was a shooter himself in terms of not wrestling, but a fighter.
Right.
He was mad about something. He wasn't going to just say, well, I'll just take it. He'd do something about it. A lot of guys, and that's what I'm thinking about, like, again, Waldo Von Erich, Tiger Jeet Singh, and guys that had been around a long time. If we were in a bar, I don't know if I would go up and sit with them. Not to be unfriendly, but also a lot of these guys were reserved with me because I was a so-called shooter. I knew how to wrestle for real, and it creates a thing. There's another thing. Until you learn a business, once you learn the business, like if you've been, say you're that sergeant in the service, now you've been in the service 10 years.
Right.
And that other sergeant's still in there. Now he's been there 30 years. But you now have enough experience. You
right.
can talk to the guy.
I get you.
More on the same level. You have enough experience now. So
I get
that's
you.
the way I felt. And these guys that were old hands, I read in research about Waldo Von Erich, he retired in 71. So when I saw him in 72, he had just come back to work. It was hard for me to feel comfortable with those guys, and probably the same thing. They don't want to have to talk down to me. What are we going to talk about?
Right.
They can't talk. We can't talk about wrestling stories. I don't have any. So, I can't talk to them about amateur wrestling, and a lot of the guys don't know anything about it. So that was another reason. I looked at the guys that I did know, like Robert Bruce, for example.
Okay.
Was the guy I worked with, a Scotsman, and he was a lower card guy. I'm not sure, he didn't get beat every night, but that was his position, and he didn't care. He was making a payday. Hans Schroeder, another one that was from New Zealand, I think. Con Tolios was a wrestler and a boxer that was very accomplished. I think we've been talking about different guys now for months, and I think one of the reasons I don't know some of the main event guys at this stage of my career is because that's the very reason. I felt kind of like a rookie, and let me transpose it. When Dr. Death Steve Williams broke in, by that time, I was a pro. I'd crossed the Rubicon. I knew the business. I knew the office hold and all that. I'd been a booker, and so I didn't have much to talk about with him either. When I think about us sitting down at the bar together, I don't know, what are we going to talk about? Is it our amateur days? So there's not really a lot to talk about. I talked about being with Nick Bockwinkel. I said, Nick and I didn't talk about the business because I was fairly new at it, and he was an old hand. But we talked about a bunch of other stuff. That he was
sure
he was literate, well read, and all that. So, and I'm sure Dr. Death was too. He graduated from college. I'm sure he learned something. So, but I see, again, for any of our audience out there, please don't be frustrated when at this stage of my career I don't know these guys I crossed paths with very well because I didn't have any reason to associate with them.
Well, luckily, you're going to cross paths with some of these guys time and time again. So you should, you'll have some information on a few of these guys. Why don't you kind of touched on him just briefly last week. You said, he lived his gimmick. And I was curious if you have any specific stories when you say that about Dick the Bulldog Brower?
Oh, man. A guy was a maniac. When I ran into him, there was another guy there, and this was weird, too. Like the same kind of Big Bad John culture of undercurrent of illegality and nastiness. There was a guy that was hanging around the wrestling. When I got over there, I could be in the bar and was hanging around with Brower. And it actually they had some time off. He'd gone out with Brower a couple of times. He had some stories to tell about him. But this guy never could find out. He was apparently lived in Las Vegas, and some people thought he was a hitman, that he had done a hit, and that he was laying low for a few months or whatever in Australia. And he just seemed like a regular guy, but he told me a story about Brower. He and Brower went out in Sydney one night. They had a night off, or maybe it was after the matches. It might have been after the TV. Perhaps, let's say they had a night off. Brower was sitting in the front seat. This hitman, let's call him the hitman, was sitting in the back seat. They got to the hotel, be let off, and the taxi driver picked up his microphone, his handset, and called back to his office to say that he just arrived at the hotel. He put the microphone speaker back in the little harness that it sits in the holster. Well, Brower reached over and grabbed that, and he pulled it up. Now, he was going to talk about it. Well, the guy didn't grab it. Brower, you're looking at the guy, you can feel that you're sitting next to a maniac.
He had those eyes, man.
Oh, well, I mean, he radiated. He just was like this volcano waiting to go off. And the guy just reached over and turned his radio off. So about when Brower went to say, hey, hot 2, 3, whatever he's going to say.
Sure.
Hey, I'm Bulldog, whatever. There was nothing. What does Brower do? He rips the thing loose from the radio, throws it out the window, jumps out, tries to rip the door off the taxi. All he does, he didn't get to rip it completely off. All he did was spring it, pulled it completely off its normal rotation. It's
sure.
Whatever, where so the door's just hanging there when he's done with it. And he's screaming at the guy, I dare you, you know who I am, I'm Bulldog Brower, and the taxi driver, the hitman said, buddy, if I were you, I'd take off. And the guy took off with him still in the car. And
the door wide open.
You talk about a maniac. I mean, you say, well, was the guy working? I mean, was this dude living his gimmick or whatever? But who would do it to that degree? I mean, you could get arrested for doing stuff like that. So,
that is most certainly Brower power for certain.
Yeah. Yeah.
He worked everywhere, but he worked a ton in this area for the Sheik, and he worked in Cleveland a ton. So I didn't get to really see him work, but the story, anybody who watched any type of wrestling in the generation before me, they would always talk about Bulldog Brower as one of the top heels. And shortly before he passed away, he was coming through town. I'm sure he knew a lot of people in this area. He stopped by an indie show that I was at. This is back in whatever it was, 94, 95. It was just months before he passed away. And I didn't, you couldn't recognize him. He was much older. He had a beard. And he comes in, but I hear one of the wrestlers say to another wrestler, hey, Dick Bulldog Brower's here. And there's not a human being in that crowd, a bunch of kids and, 20-year-olds and whatnot. Nobody knew what a Dick the Bulldog Brower was in the mid-90s. I'm sad to say I did, because I'd heard the stories from my dad, my uncle, blah, 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 blah. And, I collected old magazines. I studied things even as a kid. So I knew who that was, and I didn't really recognize that to be him, but I stopped. And he looked at me, and I said, can I have your autograph? I didn't say who. I didn't say Dick Brower or Bulldog Brower. I said, can I have your autograph? And I handed him this pad and paper, pen, and he signed it, Dick the Bulldog Brower. I was like, wow, that's so cool. And then a few months later, I'm opening up a, Aftermag, and it says he passed away. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well,
he was the nicest guy could be in the mid-90s.
Well, by the time, life has a way of taming
Mellowing.
People.
Yeah.
Yeah, mellow, tame your instincts. I was surprised. I'd never heard of him before I came to Australia. Never heard of him. Again, I never read magazines, but when I looked at his stats today before we got on the air together.
Right.
I didn't realize the extent of his being a main event type guy.
Yeah.
He worked in a lot of places. It was like with John Quinn on another show. You just don't know because there was no internet yet. There wasn't Facebook. There wasn't all these, MySpace and all these things where guys could advertise. Yeah, where you could find out about anything. You couldn't Google them. Today I could Google all these guys. If I had to do a report on Bulldog Brower back then, I don't know how I would have done it. It wouldn't be. I don't know. You'd have to go find him, I guess. Anyway,
safe to say he's just one of those characters that made you believe at the end of the day.
Well, yeah. Well, one time I worked with him. He was about 5. Said in the book 5'9". Yeah. That might be right, but I'm only 6 feet. So, but one match I worked with him, he hit me with a forearm, like under the sternum, like not in the belly really, but say between my pec muscles and my abdominal muscles. And he lifted me. I was leaning forward into it. He lifted me off the ground. It didn't hurt, but he was powerful. Now, another time, Psycho Negro and I were in the gym, and Brower was in there working out. We're not working out together. He's working out by himself, Psycho on the other side of the gym. All of a sudden, we hear this guy yelling, and we look over there, and Brower's chasing the guy. He's got about a 40-pound dumbbell in his hand. He's chasing this guy, and the guy's screaming and running out of there. Brower actually throws the dumbbell at him. He missed him, but he threw. And
I was going to make a joke, Bob, and say, what did he do? Whip a dumbbell across the gym? But I didn't think you were actually going to tell me that he whipped a dumbbell across the gym.
What he did was he farted. Brower farted, and he was a bulldog, and it was full of bulldog crap, and it smelled and it stunk. And a poor guy working out somewhere near him, I guess a cloud of noxious gas.
Sure.
Made him ready. All he did, he went and opened a window nearby, and it wasn't cold. It wasn't like 20 degrees out. This was summer over there. It was nice. But he opened the window, and Brower said, he was screaming, "Who told you could open that window? Y'all catch a cold. I won't be able to work. I'll kill you." Oh, I mean, and I'm looking. I don't know the guy at all. I'm looking Psycho, and I said, "Is he working? Is this a gimmick? Is that what he was?" He said, "No, I don't think so, Bob, amigo. I think that's who you see." And he had a routine, and I don't blame him. I mean, the guy was, he was doing very well over there. He got over there, so he was making good money. Mm-hmm. Well, he'd come down to a Texas Tavern. Was the name of the hotel we stayed at. At breakfast, a few times he came in. He would wait apparently.
You're talking about Brower or somebody else? Okay.
Brower would come in. There would be a table of 3 or 4 people sitting together, wrestling, and maybe a friend or two, sitting together eating. And Brower would come over, and he had a leather jacket that he had made over there, and he also bought a Rolex watch, and he had a big diamond ring. The stereotypical accoutrements of a successful wrestler.
Flaunt it if you got it.
Yes. Big diamond ring, Rolex. He would come over to the table and he'd say, "Hey, what time do you have?" And so when people would look, say, "Well, it's 10 after 10," he'd reach up and he'd pull the sleeve of his leather coat back, and he'd be practically leaning over the table that you're eating on, and he'd flash his diamond pinky ring, and he'd flash his Rolex watch. And he said, "Oh, well, my watch has 1 minute less than that, or 1 minute more than that.
Right.
I'm just checking to see, And then he put his sleeve back down. He did the same thing for different people all the time. He was showing off the jacket, the ring, and the watch.
There you go.
And I don't blame the guy. I mean, if you want to do that, that's fine. But personally, amateur wrestlers would rather have other people talk about them than talk about themselves. So. I wasn't from that school, but he was. I can't blame the guy. He was being successful. Here he is he kind of stayed around the northern part of the country, Canada, but he stayed.
He worked a lot in New York as well.
Yeah, mm-hmm. But that's right. But he didn't. I don't know if he ever worked in Florida. Maybe he did. A lot of guys would come down, like we talked on another episode. Come down for a week or two in the winter and to get booked just to be able to write out.
I don't blame him.
Yeah. Well, of course. So, Yeah, but let me think. Any other Brower stories? No,
No,
I think
that
that's
was plenty
with that.
enough. No, that was fun. I appreciate that trip.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Again, he got over there, and I wasn't over at the time. In fact, I didn't even know. I hadn't learned the business yet. I didn't go to Barnett or anybody else and say, "Hey, I got this idea how you can put me in an angle with Spiros or Mario or somebody."
Right.
I didn't even have
You
a
kind of
clue
just
about
went with
doing
the
that.
flow.
Yeah, Ed Graham had to have me in the office there, assistant booker, I
Hmm.
think 3 different times before I finally got enough experience to catch on. Yeah, Bob, you're booking other people all this time. How about applying that to yourself
Yeah. How
now?
about, you are part of the roster, Bob, right? So he had to remind you. Oh, yeah, I
Uh,
forgot about that.
I might have said this before. I'll repeat it though, but because it's just one of those seminal moments that you'll never forget, or hopefully. But they said at one time I was getting ready to leave. I think maybe to go to California. He said, "I think Bobby said you're in a place now." He said where you can go anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world, and you can take care of yourself. You can get over, do what you need to do to be successful.
Hmm.
And it was true. And the affection I still feel a part of me for Eddie. The parts about him I liked.
Right. Well, that's such a
What
weird dynamic because he did so much for you, but at the same
right.
time, he did a lot of other things too. So I totally get where you're coming from with that. It's got to be a really crazy. I don't even know how to describe that. I don't know. I truly don't know how I would feel about Eddie Graham.
Well, let me give you another moment. I don't know if I told this one. I came back. He was sober for I don't know how many years. He was sober the first 10 years, 8, 9, 10 years that I
That you were there?
worked,
Okay.
that I wrestled, and that I was in the business. He started drinking again. I came back a while after he started drinking, and we worked a match. I was under the mask. I can't remember exactly, but we were in Orlando, a tag team match, and he came down, and he wasn't staggering drunk, but you could tell he was intoxicated. And he hit me, and he's half blind, lost his sight in one eye through an accident in the home arrest of the army. A window fell and blinded him in one eye.
Hmm.
But anyway, he punched me, he hit me right in the mouth, and knocked my lip through through one of my teeth.
Hmm.
And I took a bump out of the ring, and so we came back after the match. And Orlando, I was dressing upstairs, he was downstairs. I just want to just say, I wasn't going to say anything to him. I was just going to say, thanks for the match. And he came up and he put his hands on my arms and leaned up and kissed me on the cheek. Big grin on his face, kissed me on the cheek. What do you say? Well, what do you say to something like that?
Yeah.
Smiling at me, kiss on the cheek, and just looking at me like, hey, I just say thanks for the match and went on my way. So I only tell that story to say that, nobody's all one thing or the other. We can all be good. We can all be bad. Sometimes one personality trait dominates through whatever, but nobody's all bad. And I still am grateful. I wouldn't be sitting here if Eddie Graham had started me in the business.
Right.
So how can I not be grateful to the guy? Because I like being here.
Yeah.
Everything I have, my boys and all that, he has a hand in creating. So how can I not be grateful to him?
No.
By the crowning afterthought that you have to say is that he ended his own life, which is an indication of how he thought about himself. So it's hard not to say, well, some of the thoughts I had too obviously are legitimate. The things I just approved of. Again, it's horrible the thing is, it's horrible on survivors. People feel guilty, like they had something to do with it. They've been stronger, the person, whoever it was, wouldn't have killed themselves. But anyway, I don't want to get too morbid here.
No. We'll head back to Australia. I had a couple of names for you here, Bob, that you encountered during your tour of 1972. Some interesting names people will recognize, maybe not up front when I say them here, but you will recognize who they become later. Bob Roop taking on multiple times here in your 72 tour, a guy by the name of Gorgeous Teddy Williams. And then also in some tag team matches, you wrestle a fellow by the name of Brutal Bob Miller. Now, these guys would later go on to become Crazy Luke Williams and Butch Miller. And you guys may know them as the Sheepherders, and even younger fans may remember them as the Bushwhackers for the World Wrestling Federation. And I was curious, I don't know if you really remember your time working them here in Australia, but do you have any Sheepherder stories whatsoever about Luke and or Butch?
Oh, they were good. They were good guys. Good team. very professional in their ring action, and all those things we talked about with any tag team is when you're switching and doing illegal stuff, that where you don't put the heat on the referee, you don't do it right in front of them or whatever. You do it in a way that the referee has an out. In fact, if a referee can hears the people screaming about something, and he can actually go and ask them, what is you're talking about? And they'll be making the gesture of the gimmick or whatever, the thumb in the throat or whatever. And then the referee can go and ask the guy, well, did you do the thumb in the throat? Make the same gesture. And it takes all the heat off the referee because it's clear he didn't see it. Now, if he turns around and sees it, I mean, the guy does it about 4 times while he's standing there looking at him. The heat goes to all the wrong place. So, but the Sheepherders they were nice enough people too, easy to get along with. They had good sense of humor. A lot of the Commonwealth people, Englishmen and Scotchmen. Not all Scots are. Some Scots are dour, a little bit dour. Maybe it's because of the climate up there, but a lot of Welshmen and Englishmen, Australians, Canadians. Good sense of humor. Les Thornton, Tony Charles, Lord Al Hayes. Yeah, he came into Amarillo as Lord Alfred Hayes. Yeah, good sense of humor, fun to talk to, fun to be with. Guys you could go in a bar or be on the road with.
And what's so serious? Those guys were so serious when they got in the ring. The Sheepherders, obviously, the wild and crazy Sheepherders. But you think about Les Thornton, never cracked a smile in the ring. Tony Charles, the same. But man, and they were, they could get it done. Those guys were shooters. Yeah. But at the same time, it's funny to hear you, and you're not the first person I've heard say that those guys all have, great senses of humor. And as the years progressed, obviously the Sheepherders become the Bushwhackers. And if you don't have a sense of humor, you can't pull that off. Licking each other's heads and playing with the kids and whatnot. So, and I've heard Luke do so many interviews over the years since that time period that it's very obvious to see that, yes, the Sheepherders were some wild and crazy fun guys to be around. So I was just curious if you remember them. And I forgot that they probably did pass through Florida when you were there as well in the 80s. So, yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
So here's another name. I don't know if you got to know him very well. You probably not, but the Iron Greek, Spiros Arion. Now, you don't work him really too much here in the 72 tour, but immediately upon returning for the Fuller and Welch group at the beginning of 73, you worked Spiros quite a few times, at least in the month of January. So I was just curious if you have any memories of Spiros, if you hung out with him at all, if any memories you might have of working with him in the ring.
Not really, and I'll tell you why. Again, that's something I referred to a few minutes ago. Spiros was a very accomplished and experienced guy in the business. I was a newcomer. Now we would talk in the dressing room. Hey, how you doing? All that.
Sure.
I remember one time I had a hotel room above his, and my girlfriend and I were there, and he overheard us doing gymnastics or something up there, and so the next day he read me about in the dressing room. He said, "Hey, if you and your girlfriend are going to wrestle up there all night," he said, we almost took a broom to the ceiling to get you to hush it up. But he would. I got intimate enough with him that he could make that. He could tease me about that. But the same thing. What am I going to talk to him about? What is he going to talk to me about? I don't know jack squat about the business yet.
Tell him to educate you on grease.
Yeah. Hey, I like Greek salad, Spiros. I love Greek salad, man. You and I should really hit it off. So, yeah, and that again.
In some instances, even if you don't have actual stories for these guys, it's just cool to know your opinion on them. Were they good people? Were they maybe not so approachable? So it's just good to hear. Would you say that Mario Milano falls into that same category, just another guy from another era that you didn't really get to know very well? Because he was a big deal over there, too.
Yeah, but Spiros was, don't get me wrong, Spiros was a warm guy, but he was forbidding to look at sitting in the dressing room. He wasn't all lit up, smiling and reaching out. He kept to himself, kind of. He was quiet, and he had kind of a look on his face like, don't bother me.
Gotcha.
Mario was completely different. Mario was warm and friendly and, cutting up and coming and saying hi and showing that he was accessible to talk to you if you wanted to, and
right.
Maybe initiating a conversation. But
So different personalities, but both good guys. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, both of them good guys. Well, they kept. Now, Mario, I believe, lived in Australia. I think Spiros didn't. I don't think he lived there. Maybe he did. But I know that they spent a lot of their career there. They had big Italian. You talked last week about Spiros and San Martino wrestling in New York, in the Garden.
Right.
And you had the Greeks in New York and the Italians in New York. You probably had 5,000 of these in the Garden, cheering on their guy. Maybe not so many. I don't know if Greeks want to push, if their guy's a heel. I don't know if they're behind him or not, but it just maybe for ethnic reasons they would back their guy.
Sure.
But I could see where they would like to say, yes, us Greeks are tougher than you Italians.
Yeah, that was Vince Sr., that was his deal. He would always have that, the Irish champion was to be Bob Backlund, obviously the Hispanic champion, Pedro Morales, Bruno, and Bruno all everywhere in between, for the Italians. So it was always some sort of ethnicity deal there to draw the people into the Garden, but obviously they did pretty damn well for quite a long time there, long before Vincent Kennedy McMahon took over in the early 80s. But yeah, I always go back to those matches where Arion was a babyface when he came in, and he got over. Like, he was like semi-main, right? He wasn't Bruno, but he was right underneath Bruno as the next guy up as the babyface. And then he turned heel, and then he worked Bruno. And there was like near riots. They would cut these promos, and I don't know if it was for show or not, but when he cut promos after he had turned heel on TV, it was the only time ever that they actually had police surround Arion during the promos to keep the fans away. So it was always very interesting. Yeah, it was pretty damn cool stuff. Again, I don't know if that was for visual effect, but it was the only time they ever did that. And he got a lot of heat. So he was a kind of interesting cat because he was gone by the end of the 70s, and he goes back to Greece, never to return as far as I know. So it was just always interesting. I was curious if you had anything on him. Here's another name for you. I don't know if you spent any time with this guy, but Crazy Luke Graham.
Not much. Luke and I mean, we got along okay, but I was never in a place. I did research on Luke today too, and I saw that he was over in places where he was hot, and I was never in a place in a territory where he was hot at the same time I was, or even while I was there, even if I wasn't hot. I never saw it where he was being featured. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
He was always mid card. And he was good. I worked matches against him. His work was fine. But, he had that gimmick of being crazy,
right?
Putting his hands over his eyes or his ears or whatever and doing a goofy bit. If that's not being pushed, it's just, let's do that in the first match. You're not going to get that. First of all, he shouldn't be in the first match. But even if you're in a semi-main event or whatever, unless you got an angle going with the guy, you're probably not going to get the heat that you would get a chance to do your act. Well, that's why Dusty and Jimmy Valiant was another one. They did their act from the time they got left the dressing room.
Right.
They did it walking down the aisle. When they got getting in the ring, once they got in, they were doing their shtick already. I hated working with them. Jimmy Valiant's one of the nicest guys I know. I really like him a lot and respect the heck out of him. But God, I hated work. I had to work with him in Omni. And I just
You're not the first person to say that. Like, everybody loved Jimmy, but they didn't necessarily like to work against Jimmy.
Well, if you take him and do a Johnny Valentine with him, you kill him. You kill his gimmick. So you don't have 40 minutes to mess with. So you got to go out there and put his stuff over. And then to get heat, you can't really have him down where you're putting the boots to him and just beating the crap out of him because it's not an angle. And, if you have an angle, that's one thing where you're going to come back, but it's just a match. And so it's hard to get heat on him. That's the thing, because he couldn't sell too long without hurting his gimmick.
Well, you can only lay there and twitch for so long, Bob. Jimmy had one sell job, and that was it. I don't know if I ever told you this story or we told this story on air here. I did it on one of my podcasts. Did I ever tell you a story when they were working for Crockett, Jimmy Valiant and Dusty was booking, and Dusty got into it with Tully, and Tully pissed him off. So the first thing Dusty did was book Tully Blanchard to feud with Jimmy Valiant for a couple months there.
Oh, God.
That was his payback.
Oh, jeez.
Have him work with Jimmy.
Well, we're detracting from Jimmy. Jimmy's a wonder. Isn't that funny? He's a wonderful person. He's
Yeah.
just the best guy in the world. The nicest guy. I'll be frank, I don't know anybody any nicer in the business than him. Just a sweetheart, just the nicest person.
Yeah, I haven't met, ran into Jimmy. It's been more than 20 years, but he was totally cool to me on any indie show that I ran into him back in the 90s. You know, I got to do the high five with him, you know, like a Mark that I was as a kid. But you could imagine me as a kid in the 80s, you would gravitate towards a gimmick like the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant. So I loved him growing up.
Well, you know, he's sincere. He doesn't have any pretensions of, oh, I'm a big star and all that. I can't talk to certain people. He likes everybody. He's nice to everybody. Yeah. You know what it is? He's a real person, which you don't see in the wrestling business. But most guys hide their real self behind whatever their gimmick is. And what you see is like Dusty putting on his shtick. But Jimmy's not like that in private. He's quiet, you know. He's not doing the boogie woogie stuff.
Sure.
But you know, just a good guy. I really like him.
Totally
cool.
It's
nice to have people like that you can talk about and put over in a positive way. It'd be terrible if everybody you talked about say, "Well, that's another jerk." Oh yeah, I'm that too. Hey, I like that Bob Roop. Oh, that's really a jerk. That guy. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that story. Well, here's a name for you. Here's a name for you, Bob. Actually, you mentioned this off air, and I know you kind of mentioned him, touched on him very briefly when we were talking about the San Francisco territory, and that's Paul DeMarco. Worked with him a little bit here in 1973 for the Fuller Welch incarnation of the Australia territory, and so I was hoping maybe you had a story or two about DeMarco.
Well, I met Paul in Australia. He was basically hiding out over there, and he had a problem with his sexual makeup, and that sounds weird. I don't want to. Don't turn your program off yet. Let me explain. So I'm not blacking Paul's name here. When he first started, he had worked with a gay wrestler. He'd been his second or his can't. And I looked and I looked and I looked. I tried to find the name of the guy. I think it was for Pfeffer, and Ronnie Garvin knew about it. And there was always this rumor that the gay guy hit on Paul and all that, but Paul always denied it. Ronnie told years later, here's how it happened. Paul liked to do grandiose, big Cadillac, diamond ring, cigar. And one time he was taking Ronnie, giving him a ride from one place back home, and he's talking about him. He's kid. He's calling him kid and all that. So Ronnie started talking about. Ronnie knew his background with this gay wrestler and up with Pfeffer from 10 years, 8 years before. So Ronnie starts talking, yeah, there was this guy that worked up there for Pfeffer. Yeah, the guy was gay. I can't remember his name. And he didn't wrestle as Paul DeMarco with this guy. He had another name. I can't remember what it was, but he had another name. All the way back to the town, back home, Paul keeps saying, well, was it so-and-so? Was it so-and-so? And Ronnie said, no. And finally, as Ronnie gets out, Ronnie says, oh, I just remember who it was. It was that Joe Schmo, and that was Paul's name. Paul starts pounding on the steering wheel, going, no, because he'd heard that rumor that because he worked with a gay wrestler, he was gay too. You know that he'd done something with the guy. So he's just beating his head on. Well, what happened was that Ronnie went ahead and told Sandy Scott about the rib. Next time, a week or two, a month, whatever later, that Sandy sees Paul, he goes, Paul, he said, what have you done? What have you done? He said, what do you mean, Sandy? What do you mean? He said, I went home to Hamilton. He said, everybody in town is saying you're gay. Oh, and he made it up, of course. I mean, nobody, He didn't talk to anybody in Hamilton about that.
Yeah. And people just walk around Hamilton. Hey, did you hear the story about Paul DeMarco?
Yeah. So I was on the radio. So Paul got himself booked in Australia for like 50 cents on the dollar just to get out of the country for a while.
That's terrible. You know, it's just different times. I get it, but that's terrible just to escape a connotation like that.
Oh, man, I'm telling you, yeah, the wrestling business can be very cruel. Yeah,
DeMarco, he was kind of an odd bird anyway. Didn't he like go off into hiding for just disappear up into the mountains and live off of the land and whatnot too?
Yeah, I was there. I'd go see him up there. I'll get there in a second. So so he's in Australia, and one day he says, "I'm having an identity crisis." He says, "I don't know if I'm gay or what." I said, "Well, do you like men? And you want to have sex with men?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, by definition, I don't think you are." And what happened? He was so emotionally distraught that he got involved with a guy over there who had some kind of shop. He had some porno stuff going in the background, and he ended up, Paul let the guy get in his pocket, and the guy got $20,000 off him.
Wow.
And later on, I'm living with the same guy. I met him in Australia too. I met him. I'm staying with him after I almost got killed in Charlotte. I'm staying in South Florida, Hialeah, I think, with the same guy. His brother lives there. He's back from Australia now. And Paul gets in touch with me and tells me that this guy's name was Stephen, that Stephen had taken $20,000 from him. Well, Stephen had just taken a few $1,000s from me. So I told Paul, I said, "Well, why don't you come here and let's confront him?" So he did. He flew down there. And the way he did it was that the guy that owned the shop, this is so confusing. I'm making it confusing. The guy that owned the shop was an associate of Stevens. Stevens the one that got the money. The guy that owned the shop was coming back to the United States. He was an American, was coming back. And when he came back, he brought with him, he had a bunch of art. He had a bunch of opals. He had, a bunch of like valuable things just laying around. And Paul grabbed his suitcase and took custody of it, said he'd go to the police if he wasn't made good. Well, and to make a long story short, he ended up getting some of the art. I ended up getting some of the art, sold the opals to a jeweler. But yeah, and then later, when I go out to, a couple of years later, when I go out to California to book, I don't know how I found out. I found out that Paul was living up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and that somebody knew how I could get in touch with him. So he didn't have a phone. There were no cell phones then. But anyway, I found him. And what I would do is, we had days off, I would drive up there maybe once every 6 weeks or so. I'd take him a big bag of rice, like 20-pound bag of rice and beans and stuff. He was living in a cabin with no electricity, had a lantern. I got a funny story, though, about me and Paul. Again, we hit it off in Australia. I liked him, all right. I mean, he was weird, but I liked him okay. I was weird, too.
You seem to gravitate towards the weird ones.
Well, anyway, there's this place up there. Now, we're up in the mountains, and the little communities then, I think the school has 7 kids in it. There's no town or anything. It's like people have cabins over miles here and over there a mile. You don't see anybody but there was a communal spring where a mountain of snow melt came down off the mountain and it ran. There was a little waterfall. There was a pool that came up to about, say, a little bit below, say, the top of your chest if you're 6 feet high. Where the water ran off, behind it was a little alcove of about 4 feet deep that was like circular. So you could get under there. And with the waterfall in front of you, now it's cold because this is spring melt. This is ice melt. It's ice water coming down there. You were shut off from the outside world. It was a sheet of water in front of you pouring down, making a continuous noise. And you could do kind of mental gymnastics if you were into that kind of thing. And I was still working on meditation and stuff like that. So Paul and I went up there one time, and we got back there. We're talking, meditating, whatever. When I go to get out, there's now we're naked because there's nobody there. No, there's nobody there.
Did he ask you if he was gay again at this point?
Well, I was the wrong guy to grab if he was.
Well,
I do. Paul was. Anyway, so I get out, and meanwhile, there's been some people come to the springs. They're not in the water. They're up sunbathing. Most of them have got clothes on. And there's some women up there. Well, I don't know if you're aware of the effect that cold water has on your junk.
Sure. Unfortunately.
Well, they did a thing on Seinfeld. George Costanza called it the shrinkage effect.
Sure.
So, well, what are you going to do? I wasn't going to. You just got to, I mean, what do I care? I've been on nude beaches all over the world. I didn't care. People don't care what you look like or how you're built or hung or whatever. They don't care. So I walked up to where our towels and I sat down. So I'm waiting for Paul. I want to see what Paul does when he comes out. Paul comes out, waves over. He sees that by this time 3 or 4 more people have come up there, including a couple more women. Instead of getting out, he just kind of crawls up on the rock right next to the water and lays face down with his body parts up against the warm rock to try to counteract the shrinkage effect. And I mean, what are you doing? It's like so obvious what you're doing, right? Of course, I gave him a break. I said, "Hey, Paul, what are you doing, man? Your towel's up here. Come on, Paul, your towel's up here." And the girls were kind of smiling behind their hand. They knew what he was doing. Yeah, I couldn't blame him. I mean, some guys are worried about. I mean, I don't know why you worry about what complete strangers think about you. Yeah, well, a lot of people are. Yeah, and eventually Paul, I guess, came out of hiding. Yeah, okay. He came out of hiding, and cool. I haven't heard anything from him recently, but I hope he's okay. Hope he's doing all right.
Very cool. I haven't looked up anything on Paul, so I'm not really sure where he's at now.
Well, it's funny when you do look up stuff. So many of the guys that we talk about have passed on. Mm-hmm. They're Luke Graham. A lot of them passed away when they're like in their 60s, which 20 years, 18 years ago for me, 19. Yeah, that's one of the benefits of, or it could be a curse. Your whole family, everybody you love is gone, but maybe not. Anyway, Paul was interesting.
To say the
weird
least.
Kind of way. Yeah, in a weird kind of way.
It's always nice to run into one of those talents.
Well, that was another thing. See, he was an established talent.
Right.
But I could identify, I could identify with him because he was looking. I don't think he wanted to hang out with like Spiros or Mario or the main event guys because he thought the whole world thought he was gay. And to him, he thought that was horrible. I thought, well, Paul, this is a gimmick. I mean, it's not the end of the world. Not in this business. I told him about Chris Colt. I said, Chris flaunts it. Oh, he's proud. No, that to him was, that was just absolutely, I don't know, maybe had self-image. Who knows?
Different times, different ways of thinking, I suppose. I mean, I totally respect either way, whatever way he was choosing there. But yeah, it's a fun story, and it's just crazy to think about people even in the 70s living up in the mountains in a log cabin without any electricity. But I know it happens. So that's kind of
yeah.
I just love the story. Yeah, I used to take him up rice and beans. And
yeah. Well, you know what? I couldn't get my car within 2 miles from where he was staying.
Oh my God! You got to lug that shit.
Yeah. Well, I was in good shape.
Wow.
I was glad to do it.
That's good man.
Well, I like Paul. Somebody I knew. I figured, why not go see him and see what he's doing? I never thought about asking him if he wanted to come back and start wrestling again. He was a good hand.
Maybe that's what he was waiting for. Boy, I love these rice and beans and everything, Bob, but I sure wish you would, invite me. You are the booker. You're supposed to be my buddy. Maybe give me a paycheck.
Wait a minute. I think he did come back. Didn't he come back as a Russian later?
He did the Gordienko gimmick. I think he was Yuri Gordienko or something like that.
Yeah. That was
much later. Yeah, it was much later.
Yeah, oh yeah, he did come back then. Yeah.
Well, let me run a couple of the Australian names by you, see if they stick out to you. If not, no big deal. We'll move on. But they were fairly prominent in their country of Australia. Larry O'Day, Ron Miller, George Barnes, who would come to the States eventually with Bill Dundee. They came over together and started working in the Memphis territory. Barnes would go back to Australia, but Bill Dundee obviously is still here today. So those are some Australians. Right. Also, John De Silva, who I think was from New Zealand, but he was also a wrestler in the 1956 Olympics.
Yeah, it was De Silva I was talking about, not that Contolios. It was De Silva that was the Olympian. And he was the New Zealand boxing and wrestling champion. When we worked, I mean, I didn't know any of that because our amateur background didn't have anything to do with the pro style.
Yeah.
We might have, we probably, if I'd have known his background, we might have been able to go out there and have like a half, just going through the motions, but a half serious type match using those amateur holds. But most guys, if you do like a leg sweep or something where you're going to take them down, they have a clue. They don't even fall the right way.
Plus, the fan, you probably would have heard a fan yell, "We want some real wrestling, mate."
Yeah, you got it.
So.
Yeah, don't do us that phony amateur crap. But because I don't remember the specifics, I have to assume that the matches went okay. Mm-hmm. So again, I wasn't smart. I mean, I wasn't smart to the office hold yet. So I wasn't looking. I was still looking more at enjoying my personal life and getting my personal ducks in a row. My situation with having a young son that I was separated from. Yeah, but those were my concerns. And, emotion, when that's going on, you're emotionally, you're not all together. Your psycho-emotional stability is not there. So you're not looking at, the wrestling business is kind of a way to get places and to do things. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't the end-all, be-all that it can be. I mean, I think about Cyclone going to Amarillo and staying for 8 years. Well, the same thing every week for 8 years. The wrestling business, obviously the only reason you're doing it is for the money. But again, maybe you had a family with kids. They got to go to school for, went up just out of another benefit. With as much Hispanic population.
Sure, being down in Texas, yeah.
Yeah, although he was from South America, he was Hispanic, so
right.
Even if the language wasn't exactly
the same. You would think he was from Venezuela. Yeah,
but he would have their kids would have a lot of Hispanic classmates in school,
sure,
or some anyway. So as opposed to being someplace where it was all non-Hispanics.
I think it's safe to say that he felt he was being taken care of there by the Funk family as well. He's clearly getting paid enough that he was happy to continue to do that for 8 years, and he was talented enough to where if it ever came a day where it wasn't working out, he could just pack up and I guess they would be able to find, work somewhere else.
Well, he just put something else together. He also went to Australia and Japan every year. Mm-hmm. So he could do 3-4 months, take a month or 5 weeks off, right. 6, go to Japan, whatever, or Australia, and then come back to Texas for another 3 or 4 months, then take another 2 or 3 weeks off and have a change of scenery. And by doing it that way, it wouldn't be quite so onerous, just the same thing every day over and over and over again. And that doesn't make it look quite so black and white, or to me, that would have been like, oh my God. But I think about it now, if you can get out of there every 3 months or so and go somewhere else for a few weeks, that would definitely change the dynamic. But still. So 1,700 miles between Saturday mid-afternoon and Monday late Monday night.
We covered that stretch of road in great detail. All the cities and all the different dynamics. Yeah, it's crazy, man. Oh man, a little different here in Australia. I'm going to cover another guy who actually he blow a few people's minds here. He wasn't born in Australia, I don't believe. I think it was Italy, if I remember my history correctly. But he was an Australian for most of his career, if you know what I'm talking about here. One half of the Fabulous Kangaroos tag team, Al Costello, was here during this time period. Did you ever get to work with Al at all or be around Al at all? There's another established guy way before you got into the business. But, obviously he made heel tag teaming popular as part of one half of the Kangaroos. And he's working here a little bit with Bob Roop in 1972.
Yeah, I did a job for him. I don't remember it, though.
Okay.
But I just did a job for him. I think, I wasn't figured in. They didn't bring me. I wasn't getting paid.
They might not have been paying you too well, or they might not have been putting you in the main events, at least in the 72 stuff here. So you're not getting phased out or anything. You're not getting buried. No. You're going over quite a bit here. I see, names we've touched on many a times in the past. You're going over on Sweet Daddy Siki. You're teaming with Thunderbolt Patterson, defeating Tiger Jeet Singh. So, they're taking care of you. Maybe not financially, my boy.
Well,
but,
a lot of a lot of reasons why that happened is because those guys were getting ready to leave.
Okay.
And the same thing happened to me. When I was down in my last 3 weeks, I started getting beat.
Right.
Because that's just the way you do it.
Right.
And if you're coming back like in 3 months for sure, they might want to let you leave hot. Maybe you break Spiros' leg or something.
Right. Sure.
Right before the Christmas break, and then you come back after the New Year and you got a hot angle going. But no, and that was, again, I wasn't smart to the office hold in terms of wanting to get myself over and be working in a main event. You get to a point also where, you do know what you're doing, and you go and you have you're working underneath the card. You're working the second or third match, and you have the best match on the card, even a cold match that it turns out to be the best match on the card just because of your physical capability. Then it's almost idiotic to say, well, why am I doing this in the second match? Why don't I get in an angle and do it in the main event? That way I can make like 4 times the money I make being in the second match.
Right.
So, but once you get to that spot where you can do it no matter what it is, that's when you say, yeah, it's time to be in the main event. So what do I need to do? Which includes leaving. You need to leave a territory, threaten to leave. Or find a place where there's a spot. That's what you do. Once you do get over and you show you can draw money, then you've got something that you can take anywhere because that's what promoters are after.
Right.
You're a proven commodity. It wouldn't matter if you had leprosy; they wouldn't care as long as you can draw money. Just dress in your own dressing room, Bob, and we'll get all your opponents fired up with leprosy shots. But
there you go.
Yeah.
Oh man. So, but yeah, you talked about finishing up here. Good point. You're doing a few jobs on the way out for your buddy, Killer Carl Cox. You also get the team with the High Chief Peter Maivia before you leave here. And then it looks like you return to Florida for 1 week. So you head back home, you put everything away, and you're right back in Orlando and Tampa. You work the likes of Paul Jones, looks like Buddy Colt. And you do a few jobs here for Paul Jones throughout the week, really. And then you take some time off, and you head off to the Summer Olympics, August 26th through September 11th. And I got a few questions about that, but we're not going to do that here this week because we're focusing on Australia. So we will come back to that time over in Europe with you. And you touched on how you got back to Australia by going through Iraq, crazy. And you're back in here now in 73, and gone are the likes of Mark Lewin and Bulldog Brower. And now it's Dick Dunn, Don Carson, Ron Fuller, Jimmy Golden. So it's basically the Alabama crew coming in here. And like you said last week, Buddy Fuller, Roy Welch, they're kind of booking the continent of Australia like it's Mobile, Alabama. And that's just not, it doesn't really translate.
Right.
But there's proof is in the pudding. The promotion lasts about maybe 4 months.
Right.
At least ran by the Fuller family, the Welch family.
Yeah. Again, we talked about it last week. If they had time to, I don't know if they tried it for 3 months and they couldn't get it over. They got TV every week, Sydney, Melbourne, all these towns. If they couldn't get anybody over, they still had Mario and Spiros. So if they couldn't take the guys that they had, the new crew they had, but when you look at it, I looked at one tag team. It was Greg Peterson, who's about 5'6", and Ron Fuller, who's 6'9".
It's like a mixed tag.
Yeah, I guess it looked like a mix of a midget against me and somebody. It's just that Australia fans they're just not going to buy that. If these guys were if they were vicious and nasty and had some kind of gimmick,
right? Where
were like Abdullah's only about 5'6", but I mean doesn't matter. He scares the crap out of you. If you got some kind of gimmick like that, it's different. But if you're just going out there and same thing with Fuller, he should have gotten a gimmick of some kind because all he is this big, tall string bean that it doesn't appear to be mean or nasty or have any special talent. Why is he supposed to get over? Because we like him. A guy like that is hard to be a babyface because a lot of he's so much bigger than a lot of the heels that he works with. Especially
it's definitely hard to get sympathy. You talked about Greg Peterson. Yes. I mean, but some of these other guys that I'm looking at that would be in the ring with Ron Fuller, they would not be, near his stature, at least in height. Now, Ron was very lean. He's kind of like a Kendall Windham almost early in his career. He would fill out later, much like Kendall did. Yeah, I'm just looking at going over some of the names here, and very few return for this troupe here with the Fuller Welch booking their run here in Australia. I see Sheikh Wadi Ayub, who had been there for the 60s into the early 70s for Jim Barnett, but I don't see a whole lot of upper tier names really that Ron would be working with, you would be working with. It's you got to establish the entire roster all over again, and that just seems almost impossible when we had all these major stars and they're all gone at the same time. I'm not saying you can't do it, and like you said, maybe it would take a few months to build it back up, but you need the money in order to do that. And it looks like after the situation happened that you talked about with Ron and this fan, I'm not saying that's what put the kibosh in the entire territory, but it didn't help Ron at all, and he was basically gone from the country after that. And it wasn't but a couple weeks later, it looks like Buddy Fuller packs it in, says, you know what, I'm done with this. And Jim Barnett gets to kind of sneak back in there and hold on to the territory until he can sell it again to Tony Coloni.
Right. Well, I saw that Sheikh Ayub, Wadi Ayub. I think I did an angle with it.
I hope so, because you guys work a Arabian death match. So
yeah,
hopefully Buddy Fuller at least booked an angle leading into that.
Well, yeah, we had to have had several matches before that to lead up to that.
Sure.
Which
you guys had a strap match here? Yeah, you guys work a few gimmick matches.
Yeah. I was ready by that time. I was ready to be on top. But I don't, again, I don't remember the matches because nothing untoward happened. Nothing. Sure. Nobody was hurt or killed or
it's always a good way to look at things.
Yeah.
So I'm looking up and down the list of the talent that you encountered, both tours here, and it looks like we covered a good chunk of the names. I'm going to run just a couple more by you. If you remember these talents, we'll touch on them. If not, we can continue on. I got Buddy Wolf here and Danny Little Bear.
Yeah, Buddy was a good guy. He went to St. Cloud just like Ole did. Okay. And I almost went there. So there was kind of an association. Plus, he'd been an athlete. He was a football player as well as before he became a wrestler. So he was a good guy. He was a nice-looking guy. He was fun to be around. Enjoyed working with him. Who was the other one?
Danny Little Bear. I believe he got over mostly for I think Stu up in Stampede up in Calgary, and may have worked for Geigel too down there if I remember correctly. It looks like you work him off and on here for the Fuller run in '73.
Yeah, I don't remember if there was going to be some push for what American, Native American. Mm-hmm. He's an Indian, a Native American.
Right.
I don't remember any headdress or any big promotion of his background, his heritage, or anything. So, you know what? Again, I'm sure I wasn't watching the television. Because, I was there helping make it if I was on TV. I wasn't interested. I had my girlfriend with me, so probably every minute that I could get away from the business, I would look for it. We talked about in Australia, one of the things that we talked about was you're flying all the time. Well, when guys want to complain about that, every once in a while, something happens, like all the airline fuel handlers go on strike. So that none of the airlines are flying. Mm-hmm. And the only way you can get anywhere, you have to drive. And the reason that we fly to all these places is because there's so much distance between cities. I remember one day we started up at 9 o'clock. We had to fly or drive from, I don't remember what city, but back to Sydney. There was like 700 miles. We started at 10 o'clock in the morning or something like that and drove all day. I remember because was in '72. It was because the Watergate hearings were going on, and there had been a newspaper type transcript of everything that was going on with the hearings and everything. That was 15, 20 pages. I read that most of the way across the country. But you remember the wide open spaces I talked about there in Amarillo where there's no lights? Right. Now, this was during the day, but you didn't see anything. It was a wide open country. No cities, no gas stations. It's just wide open country for 100 miles, and you might see something. And another 50 miles, you might see something. It was, boy, you called the outback. Yeah, way out back.
Right.
Uh, so, yeah, that's when you say, well, I don't think I'm going to complain about flying those towns anymore. It beats the hell out of the alternative.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, we ran through a hell of a lot of names this week. I'm very satisfied. I hope all the listeners are. I'm sure they are. That was a lot of fun going through the names. But I had another question for you in regards to your time here in Australia.
Okay.
There's some footage out there that goes back prior to your run here. We can kind of see how things were set up on TV prior to this era, back in the heyday, if you will, when they were making money hand over fist with all of the big stars there. I was just curious if you remember how TV worked when you were there, like where it was filmed. I believe it was in Brisbane when you were there, but I just don't know if it was like in a studio, if they were doing a weekly, like a small arena deal, or if you even recall how they worked that there.
Always studio.
Okay.
For my matches, anyway.
Okay.
I wasn't always on TV, especially my first tour.
Okay.
But I might be on like every third week or so. I might have a match on there. I remember working with Brower on TV.
Oh,
I don't
wow.
remember. I don't remember a lot of the TV matches, but it was always a studio. And I don't remember having a live audience. So
wow.
Now I'm just remembering one place. And again, I might not have been on TV that much. I can't give you any more than that. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. I got you about 7 times on your first run on TV, at least that I know of. And you worked Brower. You worked Brower a few of them. He beats you. You go over on him on DQ. I'm sure he beat the crap out of you that week as well. I mean, politely beat the crap out of you. Killer Carl Cox goes over you on your final week there on TV, obviously on the way out. So you do the job, make Carl look good. Yeah, I was curious, and I was also curious, like if the TV changed between Barnett and Fuller, if the TV studio that Barnett had, maybe they pulled out when Fuller took over, and that was just another screw job to Fuller and Welch or not. But I'm assuming they kept the same TV studio for both runs here.
Oh, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I can't see that would screw up Barnett's deal if they lost the TV. So I think that he made sure that they kept them. I don't know, maybe not forever, but wait a minute. Think about it. Part of the deals of the terms of the contract between their swap, you're talking about swapping some serious money here, swapping the promotion in Georgia or Florida or wherever it was with the promotion in Australia. If there was something that would negate the deal, in other words, if you didn't comply with the contract, the person who bought the pig in the poke can give the pig back, and you have to give the money back.
Well, they didn't have to give the money back, but they said, here, I can't do anything with this, I guess. This is what winds up happening in 73. I have in my notes here that the TV was in Brisbane, but I feel like it was in Sydney. Do you remember which city it was in?
Yeah, we had a TV in Sydney, yes.
Okay, okay. All right, so
I believe in Melbourne, too. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed to me like both cities had a TV.
Oh, okay. All right. Which was commonplace back in those days. They did it even here in the States.
Right. After Barnett came and was hanging out in Florida, I don't remember ever seeing Buddy Fuller there when Barnett was there. It just occurred to me. I think that Buddy knew that he got taken, so he didn't want to be around the taker, I guess. But Barnett got into cockpit running a show up there in Atlanta.
Yeah, that's basically why he came back. They used him to compete against Ann Kunkel and wash them out there in the Georgia territory.
Yeah, there's a couple other things. Last week when I was talking about the Australia thing, I said twice that Jim Barnett came back from Australia. He came back to Australia from the United States. I misspoke, and I did it twice.
Okay.
And it was still on the tape. So that's what out there you're listening. Another thing, the story about Dewey Forte and Dutch Mantel when Dutch said, let's go home.
Right.
And Dewey left. I didn't explain to any fans out there that, or listeners who are not wrestling people, that in the wrestling parlay, when you say go home, that means when you tell your coworker, let's go home, that means let's finish the match.
Bob, I'm going to tell you, if anybody listening to this show by this point in life knows what that means. But that's cool that you're making sure to touch every base. But
well,
that's commonplace jargon nowadays. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I don't want people to think I'm confused. That's a deal.
Yeah, but, what is he talking about? He told him to go home, and the guy went home. What the hell is this guy's problem? I get you.
And Bob's in Australia. He says Barnett's coming back from Australia. Where's Barnett coming from? Or coming from Australia back. Anyway, let me tell a Bunk Harris story, okay?
You wanted to? Yeah, we were going to talk about him last week, and we ran out of time. Yeah, we could tell a Bunk Harris story on the way out this week.
Yeah, I'm in Atlanta. And,
so we're talking Bunk Harris now?
Bunk Harris. I'm booked a match in Atlanta with Bunk Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes out of I'm in the ring. He comes out of the dressing room. Now, I'm young in the business. I'm real serious about myself. This Olympian and, being serious wrestler and all that. I'm not a showman at all yet. Not a showman at all. And all of a sudden, start hearing this laughing, and it picks up, and all the way down the aisle, people are standing up and pointing and looking, and Buck comes walking up to the ring. He's got toilet paper, a stream of toilet paper about 15 feet long, coming out of the back of his tights, trailing behind him as he walks down the aisle. I was so pissed off. I mean, oh my God. Here's a guy, and is the farthest thing from an athlete that it can be. He's a 5'5", no kind of muscle to him whatsoever.
Well, he did have the nickname Baby Blimp for a reason.
Yeah. So I feel like there's enough to overcome already to try to. I didn't want to be laughed at. I didn't want my matches to be considered to be so show business to just like ha ha ha. Because normally I came out looking like dog crap on those kind of things. So anyway, I was just so pissed off when he came down there because our match started off in the land of the ridiculous. I mean, where can you go? I think I beat him in about 30 seconds. I was supposed to go some time with him, but I just picked him up, gave him the shoulder breaker, and got out of there. And I hurt my back doing that because he was a baby bump. But yeah, I remember that one. And nothing against Bunk. He's a nice enough guy, but he said nobody should have put him in. I would have never put him in the ring unless it was against another manager or maybe a female wrestler.
Right. Yeah. You talk about that toilet paper gag. It just sounds like something right up the alley of Carl Cox as well.
Yeah. Well, Carl, you might want to couch your complaint a little bit different.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Carl could do that. Carl could come down with the toilet paper and, while he was laughing, ha ha ha, and everybody was laughing, he'd sucker punch you and stuff the toilet paper down your throat, and everybody'd be ready to kill him.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, that's
completely different. Carl Cox and Bunk Harris. Let me see. That's like the difference between a lion and a turtle.
Sure. Well, it's like you said. Carl Cox was, he's a main event superstar. George Harris was 2-ton Harris. I mean, but nothing against him. He's another name, throughout wrestling history. And I'm glad you brought him back up at the end of the show this week, because as we concluded last week, I felt kind of bad because I said, man, not that we can't just bring up names anytime we feel like it, but we're usually on some sort of a format to some degree. And I said to myself when we ended the show, man, when are we ever going to get, touch upon Bunk Harris again? So I'm glad you brought that up at the end of this week's show. Kind of get him in, just everybody to me is a legend. If I know the name, they're a legend to me, and just another legend in the history of the annals of professional wrestling. So it's good to get his name in here on one of these shows. Yeah. So I appreciate that.
Too.
Yeah, absolutely.
He made a career.
He did.
With not having, all kinds of physical attributes. He made a career as a manager and as a wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
I got to hand it to him,
Right.
Again, we talked about showbiz, and we talked about different, more real life. We talked about performance art and trying to have a working match where it looks more real and not so staged or pulled by A, B, C, D, E. Yeah, those guys. We're all part of the same business. And once here's another thing. After 10 years in my career, when Buck came down, I would have laughed too.
Right. Once you had the experience, you got what was going on. I got you. Yeah.
I would have laughed too, and then I would have beat him in about 20 seconds.
Well, there you go. Well, see, that would have
You know
totally
what?
been your experience playing a part.
No, I would have done just what, just thinking, I would have done kind of what I said Carl would do. I would have laughed, and I've been rolling on and laughing, get up and laugh, point, shake his hand and all that, and then I'd sucker punch him. It's a big kick there. I'd stomp a mud hole in his chest.
And walk it dry.
Yeah, and I'd take that toilet paper and throw it in his face.
Well,
yeah.
Well, that's one way to get everybody over in the match. But
well, if you have being able to work means being flexible and being able to adjust to things. Sometimes spots go wrong. I've seen people when they have a spot go wrong and they just stop.
Yeah.
Well, people don't. People just don't know that it went wrong.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. You know, people don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we forgot to do this, or this didn't work out exactly as we wanted it to. Well, the fans don't know that. You might know that, but they don't. Just keep going with the flow. Yeah, I totally get you.
My college friend George McCurry, we were on the wrestling team together at Southern Illinois University. He got in the wrestling business, and George is one of the million type guys, just a salt of the earth, funniest, one of the funniest guys. I tell a story about, I think I told the one about Louis asking him, George, what can we do to get your guy over? George, do you really want to get him over? And George says, I could give up on the handshake. He had that kind of sense of humor. Well, George was supposed to go over where he was. It was in Fort Lauderdale. And the referee, the heels and the baby faces were on different sides of the ring. So the referee had to go tell the other dressing room what I was in the heel dressing room with George. Had to tell George, as a guy he's working with, what the finish was. George was supposed to win with the sunset flip. In other words, the guy went to backdrop him, and George would sunset flip him, and they count down 1, 2, 3, and George wins the match. So they went and did it. Everything's great. I'm the one that made the finish. So I'm sitting there watching. I thought, great. 1, 2, and the guy kicks out. I went, oh, crap. Well, you know what they did? They went and did it, and they did a thing where George was smart enough to do a little distraction, and he goes to throw the guy in, and the guy sunset flips him, and he doesn't kick out. The referee, I remember who it was. I don't even want to say it, though.
Okay.
He went over there and told the wrong guy. He told him the wrong guy. Told him he was going over.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Well, so it happens. It bees that way sometimes, Bob. But, man, what a fun episode, man, to travel over to Australia not once but twice on the same episode and take a look at a whole bunch of talent that maybe you'll encounter again, maybe you won't, some of them. And just a fun time down memory lane here this week. Now, next week, guys, remember, we are taking a week off from the show. But when we come back in 2 weeks' time, Bob, we're going to dive into your time working for the Cowboy, Bill Watts in the Mid-South Territory. We're going to do a deep dive week by week on TV and show results. We're going to look in and see all of the, top talent really of that era, the early 80s, all the way through the 80s. All of these guys had a hell of a career. You talked about Dr. Death as a rookie, and I name dropped a lot of them last week too, but we can do it again right now. Junkyard Dog, Paul Orndorff, sure. Jimmy Garvin, Ted DiBiase, the Samoans, Afa and Sika, Ernie Ladd, Mr. Olympia, Jerry Stubbs going to come in there in early 82. Yeah. Just a lot of great talent you had to work with there. Oh, yeah. It was a good, and the Sheik was there for a while. Yeah, Sheiky Baby, Bob Orton Jr., how could I forget? Yeah. Paul Ellering comes through there as well. So yeah, I got a great story with Sheiky and Bob Orton and myself. Can't wait. Including being in jail and oh man, one situation and going into a nightclub to Bob Orton. He got beat up supposedly by 3 guys, so he came to get me and Sheik in a motel to go back and. Well, I'm not going to say what happened, but don't give away too much. Yeah, what a great way to lead into the next episode. That's some good stuff. Yeah, I can't wait, man. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time, guys. We're going to hear all about Bob's time in jail with the Iron Sheik and Cowboy Bob Orton, and so much more. I can't wait to get there, Bob, and looking forward to it. And thank you again this week for another awesome edition of the show. Well, thank you, and I want to thank you, listeners out there. A word also, just. Because I care about your sensitivities. If you're not aware by now that what we're talking about is not what you've already seen on like TV or at the house shows,
and matches. We're talking about what goes on behind the scenes, and we're talking about real life. And a lot of times we're talking about what we talk this hour about suicide. We talk about real life. Now, some of the comments I've gotten in the negative are people who say, basically they're saying, you know what, I really like the TV part that I saw better than what you're saying. And I think you're a real crumb bum for talking about it. Well, that's fine. I welcome your opinion, but I'm just going to keep on telling you that's what we're going to talk about.
You can't please everyone, Bob, and I got to tell you, the vast majority love the behind-the-scenes stories, so I think we're cooking.
Well, a lot of stuff I did is still out there on film or on video. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. What really happened. So thank you for listening out there. We really appreciate it. We'll be back in your ear in a couple weeks.
And that's going to do it here this week for the Wrestling Stoop. Just a reminder, you guys can friend Bob Roop over at facebook.com/poorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell, over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. It's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And don't forget, guys, to try it out, that $5 all-access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. But for now, Bob and I are leaving the airwaves. But we encourage you to check us out each and every Wednesday for another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.